So in my gut, I always felt like there was something. Not that there was something wrong, but that there was something different.
We had a situation where we knew there was something that we couldn't put our fingers on.
If you're constantly talking to people that don't understand or trying to get advice or support from people that aren't living that life, it's really debilitating. So community and connection are so integral to feel supported by people that truly understand.
Hi, I'm Dave and this is Emily, and welcome to Different is Normal, real talk about neurodivergent lives. So, Emily, how did you first know that you needed a diagnosis day?
It's a long process. I feel like there's never that singular aha moment. It's a culmination of lots of little things that happen over time. And I think a lot of parents, and you might have a similar experience, where you see these little signs that trigger that thought of, that's not quite what I expected, or it's not quite what my friends are experiencing with their children. And with my daughter, it was a long process. So in my gut, I always felt like there was something. Not that there was something wrong, but that there was something different.
And as the parent, you noticed that first, I assume, before anyone else did?
Oh, 100%.
And did you speak to a doctor about this?
Yeah. So I think I talked to lots of people. I talked to not so much a doctor, but definitely like childhood therapists, like maybe a psychologist. Talked to my own mum, talked to my friends, talked to teachers. And it didn't feel like I was getting any definitive answers. There was always that question of it could be something, or it could just be normal developmental experiences. But ultimately what led to diagnosis day was my daughter was old enough that within her own self, she felt different and she didn't know why. And so she was the one that actually said, I want to know more. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that involves, but I want to know why I feel this way or I behave this way. And I don't know how to do that. And so that was the beginning of our path towards seeking some more information.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We had a situation where we knew there was something that we couldn't put our fingers on, and we didn't know anything about autism at that time. You don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
And we were at kindergarten with our son, who was our first child. So for us, that's parenting. We didn't know any different. And when we got to primary school, we had a few incidents happen. There were issues with the way he socialized with other people and teachers and parents. And so we spoke to people who we assumed were experts, and they said, no, there's nothing there. He's just a growing boy and he's developing at different times. So that put us at ease for a little bit. But my wife especially knew there was something that was just, she couldn't put her finger on. And we spoke to enough people who were then knowledgeable, a lot more knowledgeable than us, that maybe there was autism, maybe there was ADHD, any one of the million labels that you get handed to you as a parent. And so we decided to go down that process, and I'm forever grateful that we did. But the initial part of getting there was really quite difficult because I don't think there was enough support and enough people don't want to say, yeah, they might have autism, or they might have this, or they might have that. People aren't comfortable saying that, grandparents, friends, they don't want to say that. But as a parent, right? There's something that you need to try and deal with. And so you finally end up in a position where you say, we need to find out what the situation is, because that's the best way we can help our child. So that was our number one reason. Diagnosis meant nothing more than knowing how to deal with making our child's life the best it could be. So having said that, tell me about your diagnosis day.
Yeah. So diagnosis day for my daughter it wasn't a singular day. We were living in the United States at the time, so we were navigating a slightly different medical system over there. And after a very long neurological assessment process, we got a diagnosis my daughter received a diagnosis of ADHD, actually, with a combined presentation, so inattention and hyperactivity. She also had general anxiety disorder, and she also received a diagnosis of dyscalculia with a caveat that maybe there's also some autism there, which, I now know is an interesting turn of phrase. But the advice was, we definitely know about the ADHD. Let's get some supports in place, whatever that looks like. It doesn't have to be just medication, but it could be, a variety of things, which is what we did, a variety of things. And then let's review and see where we're at. And so the autism diagnosis didn't come for another almost 2 years. And that was in the Australian system once we were back in Australia. In terms of how I felt, I actually, interestingly enough, and this diagnosis came before I then went down the path of my own assessment. So I didn't have the knowledge of my own neurodiversity, although if you ask my husband, he was fairly confident in that at that point that, there was something going on there for myself. But I felt relieved because, what you were saying, like you knew there was something, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it. And when you said that, actually, it reminded me of a time, something my mum actually always talks about, because my brother also has neurodiversity and his diagnosis happened in the late 80s, probably early 90s. So really at a time where, let's say, ADHD was, or diagnoses of ADHD were increasing, but it was still fairly new and not well understood and significantly stigmatized, especially medicating. And the pediatrician that diagnosed my brother had said to my mum almost the exact same question, like, why are you coming to me to seek a diagnosis? And again, it wasn't we're coming to be assessed for ADHD. We're coming because there's something and I can't put my finger on what it is. And everybody that I've spoken to says that there isn't anything, or that, he's just, a late bloomer or whatever it might be. And the pediatrician said to my mum, it doesn't matter what the experts say, you're his mother. And so what you're experiencing holds more validity and more weight and more meaning and more, I would almost say, diagnostic value than any expert, because as a parent, you know your child best.
It's so true to hear. 100%. Like, my wife knew before anyone, and we both knew before anyone, and we didn't get the confirmation from people outside to say that we're right or we're wrong. So we ended up sort of going down that path ourselves. But yeah, really interesting. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so I guess just relief and validation, like validating that my instincts as a parent, as a mother, were right. Because every parent, irrespective of your neurotype, you constantly question yourself, but you're also being questioned and you're being judged, whether that's real or perceived. And to go, my instincts were right and I'm not a bad parent. I haven't done anything wrong. It's not me that's created this, but also I want to say a celebration, because it's not about having something wrong. It's not a diagnosis like cancer is a diagnosis, where it's something that you don't want to have and you want to get rid of. A neurodiversity diagnosis is really just an understanding of how your body works or how your brain works.
It's so interesting you say that. I don't know if we've ever shared my diagnosis day with our son. So I remember we had a meeting with a speech pathologist and an OT and a few other people, and they couldn't come to a conclusion between themselves. And we thought, okay, that's strange. Don't quite understand that. And then there's a group called Kim's. I don't know if you've heard of them, but anyway, what they do is they take your child into a room with a specialist who plays different things with them. And then in a one-way mirror, they have another group of specialists who watch that. And at the end of that, they come and they give you a diagnosis or not. So we went and did that, and it was one of the most amazing experiences. Like, it was amazing to get a group of people in a room whose number one focus was on your child and to make their lives better. So we had that. It goes for a few hours from memory, and then they say, all right, we're going to speak about, they all took notes. Each of the specialists took notes individually, and they get together and they discuss them, and they come back and give you the diagnosis. So my wife and I were told to come back the following week. And I remember during the week we talked about, what it would mean if we got a diagnosis, if we didn't get a diagnosis, all these sorts of things. And I know the way my mind was thinking about it, and I know my wife's was very different. And so when we were in the room, and I remember the person said to us, "So your son we've diagnosed him with autism." I remember my wife breaking down in tears, and like she was very upset. And I remember myself thinking, cool, all right, so now I know exactly what I need to do to make his life better. So only just recently, when I said that you and I are going to start doing this podcast, did I have the conversation with my wife about exactly what those tears meant. I always assumed that I knew, but I thought I'd just get some clarity. And it was about expectations, which I think as a parent are one of the most dangerous things you can ever have. So I don't know about you, but when I found out I was going to be a dad, the expectation that I had was that I was going to be a dad. That was it. Everything else that came after that was just like, oh, wow, this is new. This is exciting, whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll like the same things. Maybe they won't. Who knows? I'm just going to go along for the ride.
Yeah.
Whereas my wife was excited about, she'd already had him or her playing football, working for the same football team, and they were going to go and do this and they're going to do that. And when she heard that diagnosis, she realized that all those expectations that she had, most of them, if any, probably were never going to be met. And so it was more about being upset about what she thought would happen was never going to happen versus anything to do with the diagnosis. It was just what she had expected isn't going to happen. It was a loss of something that she never had, which I find is very common. But, you learn about other things you can get excited about, right? And you change and your expectations change. And I think that for us, diagnosis days was one of those things. For me, it was just all empowering. It was just, oh, awesome. Now I know exactly why things are the way they are. I know now I can research, like I've got every book I could possibly find. I've read them all. I taught myself as much as I could about autism so that I could understand the best things to do for him. She's done those same things too. But just that initial diagnosis was quite confronting. And I'm sure it is for lots of people. And there's no right or wrong way, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like your experience of diagnosis day for your son is very similar to my experience with my daughter, but your wife's experience for your son is very similar to my experience of diagnosis day for myself. They were two very different things because, neurodiversity is a spectrum. And so are the emotions that come with it, I suppose, right? So whilst I still felt all those similar feelings like relief and validation for myself of my own diagnosis, I did feel grief because I'm not a child. I'm an adult. I've lived a number of decades, more than I'd like to admit, without that diagnosis. And it was hard. It was hard to exist in a world that wasn't built for me. And the happiness and the celebration of knowing that I can make that experience better for my children. On the flip side, I felt sad that I'd had to struggle for so long and so many things that I'd believed to be true of myself as something that I was incapable of or to view as a failure of who I was at my core, even though I logically could now sit down and review and look back at my life and at times where I've quote unquote failed or struggled or whatever it might have been, I could relate back to being unsupported and undiagnosed. I still felt sad. I felt sad that I had to experience that. And had I known earlier and received supports earlier, maybe that wouldn't have been so difficult.
And were you diagnosed before or after your daughter's diagnosis?
Yeah, so after my daughter, but before my son.
Right, okay.
Interestingly, because I felt that way about myself, I had those negative emotions. When we went through the process for my son, I knew so much more. And we'd lived as a neurodivergent family for a number of years, right? So our living circumstances were different. Our language was different. Like so many different things had changed. But I really wanted it to be a celebration, irrespective. Because again, he was on the fence. He's a very different child to my daughter. His presentation is different. So many things. And so again, it was, oh, is he, isn't he? And I remember driving in the car on the way to the appointment after doing the initial assessments and going to diagnosis day for him. And I said, so, we're going to go to this appointment and they're going to tell us either you have ADHD and or autism or you don't. Like, how do you feel about that? He's like, oh, I don't really know, which is a pretty standard response for him to any question, big or small. What do you want for breakfast? Oh, I don't know. How do you feel about being autistic? Oh, I don't know. And so I said, well, okay, if they say that you've got autism or that you've got ADHD, are you okay with that? And he's like, yeah, I am okay with that. And I said, and what if you don't? And he goes, oh, I kind of hope that they do. I said, okay. And why? Like, why do you hope that you do? And he goes, because it's an answer. Things will make more sense and I will know why. And I know that you can help me. And I said, all right, here's the deal. When we leave this appointment, if you get a diagnosis of ADHD or autism or something else, maybe we'll get a surprise. Who knows? Let's go and get a cake and celebrate. What sort of cake would you like? And he said, oh, ice cream cake. I said, okay. And if you come out and they say, no, you're neurotypical, let's go get a cake anyway and celebrate that. Because at the end of the day, it's not changing who you are, right? Yeah. It's still who you are. It's just our path to support you will be different. And so we made that decision. If we got a diagnosis of something, we were going to get a rainbow ice cream cake. And if we came away and they said, no, you're neurotypical, well, we were just going to go and get a vanilla cake.
Oh, I knew we were going to say vanilla cakes. The bland cake.
Right, but a cake nonetheless. Yeah. And inevitably we ended up with the rainbow ice cream cake. And my daughter and I welcomed him into the neurodivergent club in the house. And even though my husband is potentially neurotypical, we let him have some of the rainbow ice cream.
Yeah. He's just a vanilla ice cream.
He's just a vanilla, yeah. Which is great. We need a bit of vanilla every now and again.
So when your daughter received her diagnosis, how long before you told other people?
Pretty quickly. I had the conversation with her about what she wanted in terms of being out, I suppose, neurodivergently out. And because I didn't want it to be something she was ashamed of.
How old was she when she got her diagnosis?
So she was 12 when she got her ADHD, or 11, almost 12. And then she would have been 13 when she received her autism diagnosis. Okay. And because she was the one that was asking for the answers, I really wanted her to have autonomy. That's a big theme about how we navigate the world. And I didn't want her to be ashamed. I didn't want her to feel like it was something that she had to hide about herself unless she wanted to. And she didn't really want to hide it. She was happy to be open. And so we were open pretty quickly.
And how did that affect relationships with other people? Or did it affect it?
I mean, I feel like it has to have an effect, right? Information of any type is going to change the paradigm or the dynamic of things. And again, it's varied depending on who you're sharing it with. And it's a complex journey that we, have people that are supportive and understanding. And, that's a spectrum because people only can understand and support as much as they can based on their own knowledge, their own willingness to learn and grow. And the opposite can be true, where people are maybe dismissive of it or negative of it. I'd be interested to know how many people have said this to you, but if I had $1 for every time somebody said, oh, but we're all on the spectrum, or we're all a little bit autistic, we're all a little bit neurodivergent.
We'd both be driving around in Maseratis, I believe. Yeah.
But that's taxing.
Yeah.
Like it's taxing to have those conversations over and over again. Where isn't my job to educate?
Yeah, it's exactly right. It becomes a point when, so our son is now 16, turning 17 very shortly. He was diagnosed when he was between 4 and 5.
Okay.
So we've had a long time to play with it.
Yeah.
And so it was at primary school when he was diagnosed. I think he was in prep, and he might have been just before prep, but it changed a lot of things for us. And so as a result, our social situation changed quite a bit too. So he struggled with, so for example, say we're at a birthday party and it was too noisy, it was too loud, it was too many lights, too much sound. There'll be a point when we'd say, oh, we have to go. And some people are very understanding and some people are not. So initially we got the diagnosis and we sat on it, and we probably sat on it for about a week. Didn't tell anyone.
Yeah. Did you tell your son?
No,
He's
he
young.
he wasn't really at the age where it meant anything to him, but it was more about, we wanted to make sure that when we told people, we told them in the right way, and we wanted to arm them with some way to be able to handle it when we told them. So I remember we organized for my parents and my wife's parents to come over, and we sat around the table and we explained what the diagnosis meant and how we needed to then parent as a result. And we said, but us parenting using a certain set of rules is going to mean nothing if you guys don't also follow the same rule book.
Yeah.
And if school doesn't follow the same rule book, it's not going to help anyone. So all of our parents jumped on board straight away. We said, this is what we're going to do. These are the rules we're going to play by. Other things that need to happen. And they were all 100% behind us, which was amazing. We wrote a letter to every family in the whole of prep.
Yeah.
So I think there was 4 classes of preps, 25 odd students. So he wrote a letter to every single parent and explained, this is our son. This is why you might see some differences. This is why you might see some similarities. He's very trustworthy. He won't lie. All these sorts of things. We're explaining his characteristics and why he might behave the way he does. And, when this happens and you might see him doing this, it's just because he's happy or because this is overwhelming or this is sad. And we would do that every year up until about grade 4. And the school was always really supportive of that, which was fantastic. And as a result of that, the families at primary school, for the most part, were incredibly supportive. And so we'd get phone calls or messages from parents that we didn't know who said, oh, we'd love to have your son run for a play, and we'd love to come around and share this. And so that was fantastic. There was this massive positive side, which was incredible. But by the same token, our social side struggled a bit. So for example, had friends who they'd invite us around to a party or whatever, and we might stay 10 minutes, we might stay an hour, and there'd be a point where our son could not cope anymore. And so it's your responsibility as a parent to remove them from the situation. So we'd leave.
Yeah.
And sometimes we wouldn't go to things because we'd say, that's going to be too much. We can't do that. I'm sorry. And some of, especially my friends at the time, weren't very supportive of that. They're not friends anymore, And so by the same token, we've lost friends of a particular type and we gained friends of a particular type. I'd like to think that you and I are only friends because we did education support together, and we have this amazing connection through neurodiversity. And we, like you and my wife and I, we sit around and we gas bag, right? We talk, and it's great. It's great to have people who can relate to your life and
understand you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we joined lots of little groups of. I remember we went to the zoo. It was a neurodiverse group to the zoo. It was so fun.
Yeah.
It was so fun. And all the other parents are all on the same page. You do not have to explain anything to anyone.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. And that to me is one of the most positive things that out of the whole experience for everyone is that you learn to be accepting of so much.
Yes.
And it's the way we all should be, right? But until you're put in that situation where you're forced to, you mightn't get there.
Yeah.
So I think that's magic. And I think, so Diagnosis Day for us and the way people behaved around us has definitely changed the people that we are and the people that we relate to now, who we call friends and we don't, which I think is incredible.
Yes.
But by the same token, some things didn't change, right? So
what didn't change?
Your love for your child never changes, right?
Yeah.
If anything, it intensifies because you become almost, not so overly protective, but you do look out a lot more than I think you would have.
Yeah.
Whereas our daughter, who is 12, oh no, she's turning 13 next week.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You did it.
She's as neurotypical and as social as you can get.
Okay.
So there's an absolute massive difference between the two of them.
Yeah.
And so we are much more willing to throw her into a situation where she may feel a little bit uncomfortable, but once she's there, she thrives. Whereas our son, we are a lot more protective about what he does and doesn't do. But by the same token, he's 16. So he now says, no, Dad, I'm not having the bar of it.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. I'm not comfortable doing that. And now, because he's that age, he can speak up for himself, which is amazing. So I think from the fact that what hasn't changed is, yes, our parenting has changed, but the way we care about our kids hasn't changed. And the relationships we have with our family hasn't changed. If anything, it's got stronger because they are now a lot more aware of what we do and don't do. But I can't think of a whole lot of things that have changed. I think mostly it's changed, and it's changed for the better. I think it's richer. What about you? What hasn't changed for you?
Yes, obviously. 100% agree with what you're saying in terms of obviously your love for your children and that, protectiveness or advocacy, that mama bear kind of papa bear mentality where I think, I'm more in tune with the environment than I would have been before because I know how those things affect particularly my daughter and myself.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm probably pay more attention if that's funnily enough, somebody with ADHD pays more attention.
You've got such an incredible insight. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't have that neurodiversity to be able to look at it through that lens. And I'm continually trying to put myself in his shoes to understand things. Yes. At times that can be difficult. Whereas you have this amazing flexibility to almost be able to straddle the two worlds, which power to you. You should go to Cape or something.
Not all heroes wear capes, isn't that saying?
True. I'll have your cape if you don't want to wear it. Yeah, I like a good cape. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I agree. Social situations. What's changed in terms of family, and I love how supportive your extended family has been, and that's amazing. And our extended family have been super supportive as well. There's a lot of unlearning that has had to happen, and I don't know. It's not that there's an unwillingness to do it, but it's so much harder to change how you interact with somebody the more years you've been interacting with that person. So maybe because my daughter, was already a teen, they've created this relationship or this interaction over such a long period of time that to then unlearn how to do some of those things or to understand the impact has meant my husband and I have had to really step in and advocate a lot more in situations and for a longer time than I maybe would have liked. And that is an ongoing process. And I probably would only continue to do that with family or people that I don't want to lose and people that maybe aren't as close. I'm willing to maybe not put the effort in as much and have some distance there.
Has your social circles changed as a result of diagnosis?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we've stopped being friends with people, but our new friendships and, your kids go through school and you tend to socialize more with parents within your children's school. That becomes your social life really because it's very much driven by the children. And upon reflection, I think, though the people that we're connecting with now, particularly in my son's year level, are parents that are experiencing a similar life to us. Like tends to attract like. And so, those parents that we've connected with tend to be parents that are either neurodivergent themselves or have neurodivergent children because we have a known commonality.
Yeah.
Whereas with my daughter, that was an unknown entity. So, the social dynamic is different with the parents of my daughter's friends than they are with my son's because of our knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I asked you, what's your biggest takeaway from that diagnosis day, if I was to say to you, I've got a friend who's going in tomorrow with their child and they're going in for their diagnosis day, what message would you give them?
I feel like it's something that is my go-to message for anything. So prior to this part of my life, I was I was a child birth educator and I was in that sort of wellness space. And the big thing for me in that space was community and connection. And it's the same in the neurodivergent world, is finding the right people. Because if you're constantly talking to people that don't understand or trying to get advice or support from people that aren't living that life, it's really debilitating. So community and connection are so integral to anything, is to feel supported by people that truly understand. And that can be hard, like especially if this is
Very hard.
your initial entrance into the world. Like, where do you find those people?
I mean, we talk about our pediatrician all the time, and hopefully she's not listening, but I wish we'd never used her.
Yeah.
And she was a recommendation, but it's so hard to get a pediatrician and it's such a wait.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're sort of at the opportunity we can skip off and not need a pediatrician anymore and just use our GP for those things.
Mm-hmm.
But having a good pediatrician is so important, especially if you don't have that support network yet, to be able to have someone that you can bounce some ideas off and talk to about things that no one else probably is experienced at. That's the one thing I probably really regret about all the people we've ever seen with our son, is that I wish we had had someone in that position who we could trust with helping us make some really good decisions. And I'm not saying that they were all bad. I'm just saying they weren't right for us.
Yes.
But, we had, by the same token, we had our GP I'd been going to since I can remember. And him and I are actually good friends. Like, he's retired. We go and have coffee.
Yeah.
Got a lot of love for him.
Yeah.
And I remember early doors, he said that he didn't think that our son was on the spectrum. And I remember my wife saying he's wrong. And I said, okay. And I will back my wife over pretty much anything with the exception of football. Yeah. and yeah, I mean, he did come around and we had that conversation later on. But, you've got to have the right people and people who you can support. And having a partner you can support is important. And if you don't have a partner, then someone in your life that you can bounce ideas off. And which is why I would love to have a community where we could have people who ask questions, because there's so many questions, so many questions you have, especially if you're a new parent and it's your first child. And for us, we were one of the first couples who'd had a child.
Yes.
So we didn't have other people with child experience.
Yeah.
So, is this what normally happens? Is this not what normally happens? It's so many things. And so if you've got a good pediatrician or a good doctor, or if you're lucky enough to have friends who are having children at the same time, you can just bounce ideas off. And even that bit of mental space, where your child has been running around for 4 hours, like, I don't know if you can hear it, but he's been upstairs stimming for the last 20 minutes. I can hear him running around.
Yes.
And just to be able to have someone say, oh, that's stimming. And we do that because of, that's normal. And so for you and I, we hear that and we go, okay, that's what's happening. But if I'm sitting here having a coffee with someone who's come around to my house for the first time ever,
yes,
and I have no experience with it, they're like, what is he doing?
Yeah.
Like, do you have a treadmill up there? Is it a giant treadmill? How is he doing the whole day?
Yeah.
It's all these things, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's the other thing. Like, we had this conversation before we started recording, was we'd have to explain things to each other.
Exactly.
It's just, all right, that's happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Like last week when you couldn't come. It's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
It just makes sense.
It makes sense.
So having that community and having to be able to have those people in your lives is a godsend, right?
It really
is. And
is.
it makes life so much more relaxed, because otherwise you don't know what you're doing and you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And having someone say to you, it's okay. That's totally cool.
It's all good.
Totally fine.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
And so that to me is, I totally agree. That's the most important thing, you have a good supporting group around you. And even if it's just one person, you can bounce ideas off. Even if they come around to your house every once in a while
Yeah.
and they sit down, they have a coffee, and your child runs around in a circle for an hour, and you just sit there and you can just talk about stuff, just to have that mental load off for a bit. And it's things that you can, even if you're just venting.
Well,
I think that's
it's
so important.
normalizing it, right?
100%.
Quote unquote, you
Yep,
know, the
like
big
it.
bad word, but
Yep.
it's normalizing it. It's not a deficit. It's not this big bad diagnosis or something wrong with you. It's just a type of brain processing. It's a neurotype.
Different is normal, right?
It's normal. Exactly.
Right. It's so true. So true. And we should also say that while you and I are trained education support staff, and we are parents of neurodivergent children, and we do have experience ourselves with being neurodivergent, we are not specialists.
No.
We're not doctors, and these are just our opinions.
Yes.
And by all means,
Experiences.
exactly. So take what you want, but we aren't giving you a diagnosis. So if you're listening or you're watching, we would love to hear about your diagnosis day. How did it go? What made it easier? What was difficult? If you have one coming up, if you think you might need a diagnosis day, we'd love to hear from you. Please post in the comments below or on socials. We'd love to build a community where we can all help each other. Thank you so much for listening.
And if this helped you feel less alone or more seen, then maybe share this episode with someone that you think might benefit from it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time today, Em.
Thanks, Dave.
Have a good one.
Over and out.
Cheers.